So it was kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to let you just talk to me this way, and I'm going to stand up for myself. And then also, if it's going to escalate, like, that's fine. The corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo isn't very far away, and I'll
Yeah.
meet you there, kind of thing.
The interview by PokerOrg.
Welcome to the interview. This is PokerOrg's The Interview with Matt Berkey. I'm Craig Tapscott. We got Mr. Berkey here. It's been an eventful couple of weeks for you. Are you in Sedona or where are you at?
No, I'm back in Vegas. I was back east for the weekend, and then I'm going to go on a trip next week. I'm not sure if Sedona or maybe Utah.
Yeah, I saw that you talked about. I want to talk about your final episode, kind of sad, and at the same time, it was a really fun episode. 719 episodes. I know you never thought you'd probably get that far, or maybe you saw the vision of maybe doing this for a long time. Talk a bit about that, about your journey so far from episode 1 to finalizing everything last week.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably more likely I thought that we ended prematurely than I was surprised that we got to 719. Um, I figured at 1,000 I would reevaluate, but our hand was kind of forced with the studio being sold off. Um, yeah, I mean, when we set out to do this, I knew that it was kind of filling a void that I thought was evident in our space,
Mhm.
and it was really more of a question of, number one, was there going to be enough content to actually make the show interesting? And then number two, were we the right group of people to kind of put ourselves in the position to do so? But as it was winding down, I kind of went back and I watched the first few episodes, and I realized how much we had morphed away from just being a group of friends within the poker space talking about our daily events into more of I don't want to say a news source. I don't want to belittle actual news sources like that, but um, we did lean a lot heavier into the the daily news aspect of the poker community. We became more media than I expected us to be. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Um, and that was a little bit surprising, but I guess at a certain point you run out of personal details to share.
Had you watched Poker Road back in the day? I think that was Joe Rock, right? Back in the day. And you were inspired by the sports shows that you watch, I think.
Yeah, I basically saw what Pat McAfee was doing in the NFL space and was like, well, we're not that big, but um, I don't mind wasting 90 minutes a day listening to an expert in his craft kind of talk in a very lighthearted, comedic way about his space. So maybe we can do the same. Poker Road was way ahead of its time. Barry had a really important vision, I think, for the growth of poker. And even predating Poker Road was the circuit with Scott Huff and Joe
Uh,
Seabach and Gavin Smith. And then even before that, I think there was another show that was maybe just Joe and Scott.
yeah, Joe did
Uh,
something. I remember. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. But that was all like wrapped around the Live at the Bike days. And truly, it's kind of a shame that it came to an end when it did, because a lot of those pioneers of the space, Live at the Bike, Poker Road, the circuit predating that, and things of that nature, they were just way ahead of their time. They were ahead of 4K video. They were ahead of YouTube as a distribution platform. They were kind of just like roughing it with just decent audio, and that made doing it a lot easier. Obviously, like if we were to head out on the road and try to run a 5-day week podcast from you know Potawatomi and then all these other places, would need a lot of cooperation from the space.
Right.
Whereas if you're just doing audio, all you really need is a place to set up a bench and a few microphones. But I really think that could have evolved into something massive. And they had the right idea. They had guys with just enough name power in Gavin and Joe that were actually playing all the events, were easily recognizable, garnered a lot of fanfare. Like, I was coming up during that time. I was a loyal supporter of the show, and if I had seen them recording on some space, I would have fanboyed over it. And I think I lose sight of that whenever that sort of stuff happens to me at the Bellagio or during the World Series and things of that nature. But they also had the key player in Ivy, where he was this mysterious figure, and Greenstein just had just enough access where you'd get little tidbits into his life. And yeah, I mean, I feel like when we decided that this was a necessary niche to kind of fill, we checked a lot of those boxes. Everything from Landon being the up and comer who is just getting into the space, to my friend Brian, who was a career grinder that's now moving off into other aspects of life, and me kind of removed from it all, playing high stakes behind glass doors. I felt like we could kind of attack it from all four corners, and I guess just give something interesting to the viewers to tune into 5 days a week, because poker itself isn't going to be that enthralling.
So we just had a power outage and Matt disappeared because we're about to talk about more of the controversies, conspiracies, craziness of the Only Friends podcast. I mean, I've always had fun. I would tune in every day and try to pick the parts I wanted to listen to because I'm kind of busy, and have a chance to look at it when it was being, a few hours after it's been taped. Can you talk a bit about some of the highlights for you? And I've got some highlights I wrote down that I enjoyed throughout the last few years. What are some of the major highlights that stand out for you during the whole series?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, the the major scandals, I would say.
Yep.
The Jack Four coverage was pretty insane, and the timing of it was pretty crazy too. Like I said, as we were winding down, I went back and I watched a lot of the early episodes, and we really took off like a bottle rocket. Um, right out of the gate, we did an episode covering, for whatever reason, this old story about Brandy Hawbaker
Yeah,
resurfaced,
I knew
and
Brandy.
it just happened to be like the second week that we were on air, so we decided to dedicate a full show to it, and I think that really got the juices going for being a bit more of a storytelling podcast, being able to recount things that had happened in the past, as well as speak on behalf of quote unquote the internet, right? Because though I lived through that period, I wasn't like close to anybody who was involved in it. So a lot of my recounting of what happened was based off of stories that had been already archived on 2+2, and
Mhm.
doing a lot of the legwork, doing a lot of the research. Shortly after that, the whole GG scandal broke with Bryn and Ali, um, more specifically Ali, I guess. Though there were more people who came forward about Bryn, which
Right.
then cascaded into Jake. That all carried through the World Series, and then shortly thereafter was Jack Force. So the amount of velocity that we had as far as having content to discuss, um, as far as like being a go-to source for the daily water cooler, year
Mhm.
one was just like out of this world and impossible to replicate. So I think all of us at that point, we in some regard we got very lucky, right? We could have started off really slow, saw no growth, saw no viewership, and just decided to can the whole thing. But instead, we
Mhm.
saw the exact opposite, where it's like, wow, there's a lot of meat on the bone. People really care. We had some episodes like cracked 100,000 views. A lot of them were
Right.
over 50,000. It's like this is going to be kind of a big thing. And when you look at the cycle of year one, there was a guarantee like every 2 or 3 months that there was a major thing happening, and I think that did persist year over year. It just became a little bit more old hat when it's like, oh hey, look, another bot scandal. It's
Yeah.
it's so repetitive in nature, and you're the single source that's out there talking about it over and over and over. It's like I beat the same drum for 700 episodes, so I don't know how tired the audience got of it, but I know for us, I know you asked like one specific highlight moment, but I think it was just more so like the way things fell year one to me was
Right.
like a big highlight of it all.
Yeah, for me too. But we'll touch on a couple things because some of the stuff was fun and I was involved in a little bit of watching and rooting for you. But you've always been such a solid, sincere, articulate voice in the poker community. I want to thank you for that. You got a lot of accolades there at the end. I read all the comments on the last show. I don't know if you realize how much people love you guys and looked forward to it every day. I really appreciate you in that way. You've always been a first class professional to work with me over the last 20 years. So I always appreciate that. But there was some fun stuff I'd taken notes of, and especially some recent stuff we'll talk about in a second. But a little bit about the Jack forehand. What was a highlight through all the different guests? Did you have Garrett on too? Did you have Garrett? Did he stop by and talk also? He wasn't talking at that point, I don't think. Maybe he
that
was.
that whole 2 week cycle or whatever it worked out to be was truly insane. I mean, in no capacity was it what I signed up for. And I think one aspect of wanting to do this podcast and an advantage that I personally have is, for better or for worse, a lot of people trust me.
Yep.
Um, I mean, not really for worse. I don't really think I ever breached that trust, but a lot of people confide in me a lot along the ways. And Jack 4 was like the highlight of that. Also, the Ali stuff too. Um, I had just like known a lot of what was going on even prior to it breaking. I mean, it was like the worst kept secret in high stakes poker that Ali was cheating. Everybody in the high stakes arena knew, but you run a lot of risks being the whistleblower. So kudos to
Right.
Foxen for finding a way to get that out there. Um, but yeah, like when stuff like that occurs and there's rumblings throughout the community, I often end up with like a lot of privileged information. And the Jack 4 stuff was like very similar in the sense that every day I was in communication with Garrett, like every single day. And for the first week or so, I was also in I mean, I was Vertucci's first phone call when it happened. People don't know this. Like, I think the big reason why there was such a large fallout between Nik and I is because he confided a lot in me, as like not really so much a confidant, but like an advisor of sorts, because I had been through the whole Postle scandal and I saw how those stream houses handled it so poorly. I effectively wrote their first public statement.
Okay.
I all but dictated it to Nik over the phone. Um, and I think that that's where things went haywire, is because very early into it, my stance was not she cheated or she didn't cheat. Obviously, I gave my opinion and I thought that it was a high probability the hand was not on the up and up. But
Yeah.
I dug in very harshly on the fact that this was preventable and that we should have higher standards moving forward. And rather than like at that point, Nik no longer wanted my advice, because now it becomes a matter of well, you should take a weekend off, maybe a week, figure out all the in-house stuff, put out the fires, rather than trying to start a larger one elsewhere and distract people from what's going on. So on one hand, I'm talking to Garrett. On another hand, for at least some period of time, I was talking to Nik and Ryan. And then on the third hand, uh, Robbie and I had met that prior summer at the World Series.
Mhm.
And I didn't even put two and two together. I remember when I met her, it was in like a 2,500 no limit or something. She came up to me, gave me a great big hug, thanked me for the podcast. I have no idea who this person is. Just like, I appreciate that you watch, that kind of thing. Fast forward a few months, the whole thing happens and it like clicks. I'm like, oh my God, it's the same person. So now
Right.
we're texting back and forth. And somehow throughout the course of that 2 weeks, I think I managed to piss off all parties somewhere along the lines, right? Like every day I felt like I was putting out another fire with one of those three. There was the famous Robbie on Ingram's stream. Uh, you know, Basically Doug put out a video saying she's 99% guilty. Ingram's doing videos every day saying like I've never seen a hand this questionable. And I'm like
Yeah.
fence riding a little bit, but mostly saying the security should get changed. And she just out of the blue looks at the camera and goes, and fuck you, Berkey. So it was like at that point I kind of realized we somehow became the center of something that didn't involve us in any sort of capacity. So that was like a whirlwind in lessons learned, as well as kind of understanding the space a lot better and where we fit into it, where to insert yourself into a story, when to try your best not to.
Mhm.
But a lot of it was just all born off of having privileged information that
Right.
wasn't necessarily public, and me having to discern like how much of it can I leak, to what degree can I actually cite these sources and things of that nature.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, are you happy with the evolution of security for these on-stream sites? Obviously, you were a big input with what you were sharing with HCL. Then Lodge came out, and everybody started implementing some different procedures behind the scenes. And I remember you were really talking about it. Is that why sort of you lost Nick's ear, because now you were saying you need to change things, and right?
Yeah.
And so obviously he wasn't happy with that
I
procedure.
mean,
But
I
instead of
wasn't.
but he wasn't embracing it, going, "Yeah, okay, we're going to fix this."
I also wasn't like soft about it. I wasn't coming to him as a friend. I was like just demanding it, basically saying
Yeah,
like, "Look, you're asking me for advice. Well, you need to clean up your own mess at this point, and the easiest way to do that is to take a re-examination of your security, claim the fault for what there is, and move forward." Um, I've said this a bunch publicly on the show, but it doesn't get the
hmm
same traction as when you say things negatively about other people. But
yeah,
I couldn't give enough kudos to everybody involved for how much effort they've put forth in the last 2 or 3 years into cleaning this up. Now, it was a slow moving process. Like
right,
HCL, even post examination, still did things that I did not agree with. They still had Ryan in the peak room, and there was a lot of still some loose security going on. But since then, they've met industry standards at every single bullet point. They switched to the RF Labs table, which has a no peak option, or I don't even think it's an option. I think it's just like mandatory no peak.
right.
Um, which I'm really good friends with the creators down there. Manit, he's been to the academy, and obviously Dan, who won the main
Dan,
event, is one of the big engineers down there. Wonderful group. Couldn't imagine a better partner for HCL or anybody else who wants to do live streams. So I think that they've done a wonderful job. Obviously, all the Nevada streams have always been, pristine, cream of the crop, like what you should be modeling yourself after, largely due to Nevada gaming. And then the lodge, there's a really funny story behind this. Um, I don't know if you guys recall, but during the airball situation, Doug like publicly came after me very hard for claiming that I said things that were totally untrue about the lodge security and stream and all this other stuff that was
okay,
harmful to his employees and things of that nature. And that had happened. There was it might have been like right around the Jack 4 timing, where there was like a robbery in the parking lot where it was clearly like they had cased the situation. This kid got off the live stream and then got jumped in the parking lot for like, I don't know, 30 or 50,000 or something like that.
right,
And I took a very hard stance on like things about the live stream that were oversights. And like, look, oversights happen, but it's very important to correct whenever you have the opportunity to. And a lot of people will start these endeavors with a lot of arrogance, where it's like, oh, we'll just start a live stream. How big of a deal could it be? We'll get an RFID table. We'll get people who know how to run it. We'll create a secure peak room, and we'll call it a day. It's like, no, there's so much more to think about, right? You're advertising these high stake games where you're putting targets on all of your players, and you're in the middle of a shopping mall in Texas. Like, you have to do more, right? So I was very
yeah,
critical, and Doug DM'd me like the next day saying that I was unfair and that I'd gotten some things wrong. He explained what they were. Some I agreed with, some I disagreed with. The ones I agreed with, the next day I retracted on air. But a lot of the ones I disagreed with, I held firm on. 8 months later, when the airball stuff happened in like April,
hmm
he then had completed all of the changes at the lodge. So a lot of the things that I had suggested, closed set, security, all this other stuff, all of those changes have been implemented now. And now he comes public and says, I won't stay quiet anymore. Matt Berkey tried to destroy my business and my employees. And he said all of these lies about the lodge that were never, ever, ever true. And he's just out to get me. So fuck him. And I'm going to coach airball. And it was like, all right, well, here are your receipts. And there's a Twitter thread for this whole thing. It's very easy to find. I posted every single receipt. I posted our DMs. I posted all the things I was critical of, and then all the changes that they had made in 8 months. And he just totally ignored it and kept on the campaign. So it's like, I think the biggest thing that was both good and bad about the Only Friends podcast was it gave me a platform beyond Twitter where I could speak in a nuanced way about
Right.
problems that were very evident to me in the space that weren't often going addressed. And, I allowed myself to be kind of a counterpoint to some of the louder voices like a Dean Eggs or a Polk in the space, where you can't really stand up to them on a platform like Twitter. There's no way to outshine their reach. Um,
Right.
but, when you have your own set of microphones and an audience to listen, now you can kind of just say your piece, and whatever makes sense to the collective then starts to become more understood, I guess.
Did you and Doug come to some detente there,
Yes,
or still? No, I see.
absolutely.
I don't remember this issue. Some other things about with you and Doug. Okay. And as far as your relationship with HCL, you haven't been on the show for a while. Probably don't expect to be.
No,
Is
I
that
don't
correct?
expect to be. I'm sure that bridge is burned, but I do want to give them their credit for changing. It's
Right.
like I never had a problem specifically with Ryan and Nick. I had a problem with the way that they did business.
Understood.
And like with Doug, it's the opposite. I never had a problem with the way he did business. I have a problem with him as a person, right? So
Okay.
that's very much the difference. And I would say that the counter to that is that Nick and Ryan developed a personal problem with me, right? Because uh, they're obviously not going to have a problem with the way I do business. I'm not doing much of anything, but my opinions are annoying to them at a minimum, potentially harmful to their business in the long run. So I
Right.
understand, there being no love lost between us.
So then, was it soon after that? We see Nik Airball obviously picking on you and your company, which is sacred in a way, and saying you weren't delivering what you promised, things like that. And you guys had $1 million challenge, which I wrote about a number of times. Can you talk a bit about that controversy that happened, that an evolution to the point that someone's sending me footage of you guys shoving in the Bellagio high stakes games? So, and then obviously you sat down and played with him. You reported him into the bathroom breaks, him talking to Ishan, and then you left with $1 million richer. So, can you talk? And you talked about this on the show throughout the match. Can you talk a bit about how you felt? It seemed like he gave you your prop. Maybe I'm wrong, sort of gave you your props at the end, that you played well, you did well. I don't know how it all played out as far as you guys still talking, but it seemed like it gave you the props at the end of the match. But can you talk a bit about how you shared the evolution of that match on your show?
Yeah. Um, that was a very special time
It was
frame
crazy.
to the show. Uh, I think I think history will be very kind to the fact that we chose not to stream it. In hindsight, I don't even know if I wish I would have streamed it, but if I do, or if I did stream, I wish we would have at least explored the option of filming it and then not
Yeah,
releasing it until the match was over.
that would have been great.
That I would have
Yeah,
entertained, but I don't think people would have really cared that much. I kind of stand firm on the fact that what made it so interesting was only the sliver of access that the outside had. Like they had just enough access. The actual
right.
watching of it's relatively boring. I mean,
Yeah, heads up.
I played Blesnik heads up for 12 hours. I can't imagine anybody really cared. And the majority of the discussion around it was still on Twitter and on our podcast, and basically people who are doing postmortems of the actual match itself, not
Mhm.
watch parties and you know people tuned in to every single hand being played. Even like the $1 million cash game, the majority of the conversation that takes place around that is off the clips. It's a lot of people
True.
reliving the highlights. It has very little to do with the diehards that are locked in for 16 hours a day watching every single hand. Um, so I thought that was like a pretty savvy decision on our behalf, because it funneled everybody to our channel to get all the updates. And it also created like ancillary outlets like Twitter Spaces and
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
whatever the hell you want to call the Airball podcast that was taking place at the time, where it was just him, Brownballa, and Lin G trying to defame me at all costs. I don't know that he gave me my props at the end. I think that he chat GPT'd an apology, and like for that, God bless him.
Yeah.
I gave him credit for eating a little bit of humble pie. But again, like that's one of those things where from start to finish, it's so insane that something like that could ever take place in our space. And you know, I'm not one to keep throwing fuel on. Well, that's not true. I guess I have no problems throwing fuel on the fire, but it's like
Yeah,
that whole thing happened strictly because of Polk. It could have, under no other circumstance, ever came to a head the way that it did without Doug Polk amplifying it. If
hmm,
if Airball never gets on his podcast and Doug doesn't do the Rogan esque thing of championing for his guest and never pushing back on anything that's said, um, nothing really ever happens because it had to boil over that much for me to, um, I guess, poke the bear back and get things on my. I was like, let's be clear, I was never gonna go to the lodge to play a guy heads up for a few hours, and I was never gonna travel to LA 3 times a week to play
yeah.
this guy wherever the hell he wanted to play. It was all too much of a hassle. But if he's going to get the fanfare and the following for calling me a fraud and a scammer, then I'm pretty sure I can goad him into playing me 100 hours here in Vegas
Right.
on my terms. And I mean, obviously, it couldn't have worked out any better. I didn't have to win a million. My team and I ran endless simulations of like everything from having a break even win rate all the way to being able to win, you know, something like 50 or 60 big blinds an hour. And throughout all the simulations, like the likelihood of winning $1 million was like sub 5%. It just took like a combination of really, really, really atrocious play and running relatively well. And I would say both of those things happened. Like I probably had the
Right.
best of it when it came to distribution, and he played magnitudes worse than I could have ever predicted. Um, I think if we played a larger sample, he still probably has no chance of winning, but he's losing a lot less over time than he would have been over that short 58-hour span that we played.
And you dragged Phil Galfond in the mix, who was kind
Oh
of
god.
entertained at some point and kind of frustrated at some point. I talked to Phil, so that was kind of wild, and he was back and forth. Was there anything we missed of that conversation that wasn't shared on Twitter that you can share today?
I'm sure a lot. Honestly, like Phil's such a good dude, and
Yes, he
uh,
is.
he has so much more grace than I do. Like he's so image aware, and he does such a great job of, I guess, like being a man of the people. Where I don't know, I mean, maybe it's just like the northeasterner in me, where it's just like I'm just very frank and to the point, and um, I feel bad that he got wrapped up in that, especially because in some ways I don't want him to ever have a negative taste in his mouth in dealing with me. Like
Yeah.
I hope when it's all said and done that like at no point do I look like the unreasonable one there. But maybe I don't know, emotions run hot. But yeah, I mean
Yeah.
the text chain was very unhinged. It wasn't ever really a negotiation, right? It was just Airball making like wild demands, like wanting Ishan to sit behind him the whole match, and then me saying no, and then Airball saying like Phil arbitrate this, and it's like Phil's like this isn't how it's supposed to work. You guys are supposed to try to handle this all on your own, and then let things come to a head, and the absolute stalemates I'll negotiate. But at some point, Airball couldn't even like communicate, so he put Lynn in the chat instead, and then that kind of took a weird turn once the match was like so heavily against them. You guys probably don't recall because it's been so long, but he took like 10 days off because he was quote unquote sick, and he did so without penalty.
I remember that.
Obviously, like he wasn't sick and he was getting coached and he was playing on the Hustler stream during the whole process. But like whatever, who cares? So he gamed the system a little bit in this particular instance. But a week after that, I had requested a Saturday off for a wedding, and I let him know before the match even started that I had this wedding to go to. And then when Lynn got put into the chat, I let her know that Saturday was off, and Gelfond also let her know that Saturday was off, and she confirmed. Now all of a sudden that he's losing 600,000, they're trying to negotiate that I owe a 10K penalty for missing on the wedding, and it's just like no, that can't be true. And they're like, okay, well we'll let you waive the penalty, but we want to take another day off or something along those lines. So it's just like all a bunch of BS where obviously they were on the losing side of it, and they were trying to negotiate things in their favor as best they could, but it was all retroactive,
Right.
which just became more of a nightmare for Phil. Um, it-
Poor Phil.
yeah, I mean, poor Phil. He obviously didn't get compensated at all for all of this, which is very unfortunate. But it's also just like it's a good lesson. Not that Phil needs to be the one to learn it, but it really is a good lesson in just gambling and the community as a whole. That when you stop paying attention to people's reputation and credentials and the things that have kept them in the space for a very long time, and you start amplifying the loudmouths, the people who want to stand on business and take it to the streets, you start to deal with a lot of unhinged behavior. And that was a lot of, I mean, it was the whole airball thing. It was just very messy, and it was
Yeah.
continually from his side. You know, it was constantly getting amplified by platforms like Polk to throw shade, to talk shit, to try to embarrass me and drag my name through the mud. When the end result was he didn't even have a name to have any credibility in the space to begin with. And then on top of that, like all the accusations that he flung my way were just like fundamentally false and proven so.
So then it almost got physical, or it got a little physical. The video came out. Was that right before the match started? You were at the Bellagio with him, and a little shoving match was going on. And
Yeah.
uh, what actually? Can you just recount that for a second for people who don't know about what happened?
Yeah, it was the day before. So we were set to play the first time the next day, and he came and played our 1-2 game at Bellagio. And we had played the day prior where he was sitting like on my immediate left. And he was just chirping the entire session, but whatever. It was kind of like the high stakes poker where he was on my
Yeah,
immediate left. Like I just didn't say anything. Um, I think maybe he won or lost small, and I won or lost small. And we went about our separate ways. The next day there were two games. I was already playing the second game. He came in, and his big go-to was like basically constantly asking me how many dicks I had to suck to get a buy-in into the game, and he just came in hot. Like as he walked through the door, those were like the first words out of his mouth, and it's like I don't get that mad to like I'm a very confrontational person, but like I don't get that angry that like I really
yeah,
want to fight somebody. But I think in like large settings like that, when you're amongst your peers and there isn't a whole lot else to do, you know what I mean? Like there isn't like this isn't a war of words any longer. This is a sit down and take it, and then just beat him on the felt and hope that's enough, or it's a
yeah,
stand up for yourself kind of situation. It's like I grew up getting in enough fights where I was on the wrong end of things as a kid who was picked on and bullied quite a bit to kind of like know the easiest way to shut somebody up is to be able to actually stand up to them. And also I
right,
kind of know in the back of my head that like we're not actually ever going to fight in Bobby's room. So it's like if this happens, we're at least going to go off property. In which case,
right.
I don't care if I get detained for 24 hours or whatever. Like that's not a big deal.
Yeah,
If we get into a fight on the sidewalk and I get my licks in and we both end up in cuffs, like who gives a shit, man? Like we're all going to be fine. We have enough money to pay the fine and we're going to move on with life. But if
right.
we get kicked out of MGM property, it becomes a real headache for both of us.
Yeah,
So it was kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to let you just talk to me this way, and I'm going to stand up for myself. And then also, if it's going to escalate, like that's fine. The corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo isn't very far away, and I'll
yeah,
meet you there, kind of thing. And my best guess, my read as a poker player, if you will, is that this guy hasn't ever been punched in the face, and he's long overdue for one. So if I had got to be the first one, it would have been worth $1 million to get to knock him out and then either not play the match or possibly lose.
right. What talk? I don't remember the recounting. There was a lot of side bets going on, wasn't there, amongst
Yeah.
different sides, including Lynn, because I know you guys were friends for a long time. I think she was a student there, and I've known Lynn a little bit on and off throughout the last 10 years. But how much was won and lost on the side betting and the different sides? Choosing you or choosing Airball side. Do you
It's a
have any
great
idea?
great question.
Curious.
Yeah, there seemed to be a pretty big market. I would imagine more was won and lost on the side than exchanged between Nick and I.
That's what I thought.
But it's also kind of tough because I opened as a pretty big favorite. I think I was like, I think you had to lay like 160 to bet my
Yeah.
side.
Of course, your big favorite. Yeah.
But that might have just like, that might have pulled a lot of airball betters out of the weeds. Like when matches like this exist, it's number one very hard to make a line because I'm very open and honest that I don't play heads up,
Yeah.
and I don't think the community had a lot of faith in my ability to study or work hard for something like this. And then secondarily, there's a lot of lore behind airball. Like supposedly he was just playing 2-5 a year and a half ago, and now he's a high stakes crusher, and
Yeah.
it's easy for the general population to kind of fall victim to that. So, it's quite possible that people who bet me were able to get like really sharp lines at anything sub two. And there was probably a lot of free money who wanted to believe that Airball was stealing money, getting laid like 1.5 to 1.
Hmm. Interesting. And Sean D would bet for you, correct? Am I
I think
remembering
so, yeah.
correctly? He was on your side. So thank you for sharing all that. Then the next thing I remember was the whole Tice Becker bet. You got
Mm.
involved with Daniel in that, and that was exciting for all of us, PokerOrg, all the news channels covering that. And I like watching Becker play. I like watching Landon play. So, how did you feel about that whole run out last year at the WSOP? And I wish there was something we could look forward to like that this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked the bet. It was a really fun bet. I wish we would have been able to structure it in a way that was more interesting, though. Just because, like, the outcome that happened was the most probable of all of them, where they both
Because
lose.
they
And
both lost.
yeah,
Yeah.
so they both lose, and it's just a matter of like paying the delta. Um, that's like so. As a fan, like as a bettor, that wasn't fun, but as a fan, that's like the most disappointing. It's worse than a tie, It's like, oh, so like two guys can't win, and one of them's making money off the other one. That's like the narrative that gets spun, and I don't necessarily know what the better version of it would be. Like our crossbook is just the easiest to execute, and you're right. I mean these stories are like great. Like I came up on the bracelet bet era where there's the famous Mercier versus Selps, laying 10 to 1 for him to get three in a year. Sorry, it was 100 to 1, 100 to 1. I think he bet 10K to win a million.
Okay.
That
Wow.
he wouldn't win three bracelets, and he wins like two in the first week, and then is like heads up for a third. And she had to hedge out like $250,000 or something like that with I think she did it with Mike McDonald. But yeah, and then like Durr had a big bracelet bet where he ended up finishing second in like a $1,500 event.
I
Ivy
remember
used
that.
to have these massive bets. Like that's what the World Series, like that's what the spirit of the festival was all about, is the best of the best going out there and not just playing and competing, but doubling down and betting on themselves. um, I think we miss a lot of that. I think that was something that like our podcast was able to highlight a lot, both with the Airball Challenge and the Becker thing. Um, I think that like people want the daily consumption, but don't understand how impossible it is from, I guess, mostly from a money standpoint for that to actually happen. Like the way the World Series is covered year in and year out is embarrassing for our space as a whole. And that's no slight against the WSOP and GG. That's no slight
Right.
against Poker Go. And it's certainly no slight against Poker Media. It's just that it's so minimalistic and there is so little to get excited for if you are a fan who's unable to attend, that it's almost like a massive event that doesn't even occur. You get like your 30 streams of final tables and what have you, and then your main event coverage. And that's
Right.
pretty much the extent of it. There's no daily updates. I mean, sure, whether it's PokerOrg or Poker News that's kind of reporting some hands here and there and giving a bit of chip stack updates or whatever. It's so archaic, man. Like, that's not
Well,
how people want to consume.
what advice would you give to make this whole series, which obviously is so pumped up and people are excited to go. But to bring it to the public, to increase the people wanting to play poker and learn the game, have fun, what could be done differently in your mind since you've been around 20 years
It's
watching it there in Las Vegas? What can we do?
it's just got to be about the players. At the end of the day, it has to be about the
The
players,
story,
and
the stories
yeah,
of the
and it
players.
has to be about the festival itself. Like, unfortunately, for better or for worse, the media has always been the focal point of the WSOP in particular, and that's just a byproduct of the way that it's structured. There's really nothing they could do differently. They can't hire Rampage for the summer. You know,
Right.
they can't hire a team of players to be a part of staff. So the staff obviously has to like fill in the gap, but that's not who people want to hear from. You know, they want insights from Bobby's room. They want they want hand breakdowns, not just hand histories. They want to hear updates from chip leaders, and you know, in the past, the media has tried to do this a little bit more. There was that Poker News era where they had like Christy Arnett, Sarah Herring, and a bunch of like on camera women who were just constantly creating content.
Right.
And it worked then, but the only reason it worked then is because consumption was so much lower. We didn't have the 24/7 cycle that we have now with YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you know, all these platforms. Like we're talking 2010 to 2014 when catching a couple short videos a day from the In the Muck segment on Poker News was more than enough to make you feel like you were there. You know,
Right.
catching a couple on camera interviews with superstars was more than enough to remind you that the WSOP was very special. Well, it's like now I get a Daniel vlog every single day, you know, and that's kind of the bigger issue. I think is that people are torn. They can't get anything centrally, so they have to go to Daniel's vlog, and then they have to go to Rampage's vlog, and then they have to go to the OnlyFriends pod. And it's like we were like one of the few sources that was cohesive enough to bring in all these outlets in one spot. So if you wanted to
Right.
highlight from Daniel's vlog, from who won bracelets yesterday, from what's going on in Bobby's room and the like, we were at least a one-stop shop for that. I think that that void is bigger than it's ever been. And again, like I don't know that we were the right people, but it's very clear that there's a need for it somewhere.
And we're going to miss that. You brought up a couple things. Um, Old school, going and shifting a little bit. I want to go back to this. And you mentioned Ali. And we'll go back to it because I do want to talk about a little bit more things that happened on the podcast. But looking at Ali that happened recently in Florida, that he was kicked out after almost finishing a full day with a big stack. Do you think that was the right decision? I've talked to Matt Savage about it and some other tournament directors. Just curious how you feel about that.
Yeah,
Who makes that decision? Whether he cheated online, so he can't play live. He's been playing at the World Series, and as I understand it, talking to other people, he has been playing in tournaments down there for quite a while.
yeah. I think I have a very unpopular take on this, and I think it's very clear to draw a distinction. I spoke with a lot of smart people about this, and I see their point of views, even though I argued pretty staunchly against it. The vast majority of people, as I understand it, are not upset that he was banned from playing poker in Tampa. They were upset that they were waited until it was a publicity nightmare to actually
Agreed.
remove him from the event. So now that he's chip leading day one, let's get him out of here because Poker News is reporting on him. It's becoming a big deal, yada, yada, yada. I understand their point of view. I truly do. Um, I just feel like it's a bit semantics or a bit semantical. Um, like, yes, setting the precedence of removing a chip leader because you don't want to take his business when you already allowed him to buy into the event, it's not great optics.
Yep.
But my counter is, do you think it harms the business more or less to let him play that out and possibly win? And almost across the board, everybody agrees more, but they still don't want this uh, this like uniform power to exist, where if for one reason or another an operator just decides you're out, you just get ejected from a high EV situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should give enough credence to the powers that be able to discern how big of a deal it is to kick somebody out of an event, especially when there's 20% of the field removed or whatever.
Right.
and understand that the crimes committed by Ali are enough to blackball you from the industry for good. And I don't accept the counter arguments of anecdotal evidence of other cheaters that still exist in the space. Well, what about Bonomo when he was multi accounting back in 2006? It's like, well, we as a community have accepted that. We've accepted his apology and we've moved past it because he was the first to ever get caught doing such a thing. But when
Yeah.
you not only do it 20 years later, but you do it at scale where you have an entire stable that you are getting multiple accounts for, and you're taking you know magnitudes more money out of the space than Justin was in 2006 or whatever. um that's a lot less passable, I think. Oftentimes it's not the first offender that gets the harshest punishment, and I think that's quite reasonable. I don't want to hear about, like, the old timers who came up through the game cheating and are still welcomed into. It's like, yeah, man, like, we can't change history, like,
Mhm.
whatever. If they want to start to ban these guys now for what they did in the 70s, so be it. But it what we've fallen victim to here, and I think that we've seen it a lot in the last 5 years or so, is holding people overly accountable for things that have happened in their distant past. And people forget how much the Overton window shifts. It used to be maybe like generation over generation, but now it's almost year over year that the
Right.
Overton window of what's acceptable within a society shifts drastically. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hold somebody's feet to the fire for a tweet that they put out 15 years ago. I
Yeah.
don't care. They're probably not the same person now as they were then. And if they are, then we've been letting them get away with a lot more than that tweet over that same course of time, right? If people aren't evolving from their worst self from a long time ago, then we probably should have found them guilty of a lot of other uh, terrible things along the way. And with Ali, it's like he took enough out of the space where it's like I just don't think he should ever be able to earn in poker again. And I don't really see any justifiable arguments, right? Like, he came forward and admitted his wrongdoing and tried to downplay it, and then
Right.
just deleted everything like as if it never existed. So it's like any apology tour that might happen now, or any attempts of remorse, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it sets a really bad precedent for him to be able to compete in majors. As I understand it, like, it's very unlikely he'll be at the World Series now that GG owns them. He's
Mhm.
already turned away from all other majors, as far as I know. So it's like, yeah, his home casino in Tampa finally took a stance, and it was probably prompted by Run Good saying, like, look, we don't want our name getting associated with Ali Izmirovic winning an event. Better late than never to take corrective action. So sure, it's going to ruffle some feathers, but again, I find it difficult to call it bad business when the downside of not taking action seems so much greater than the downside of, like, booting him out of the tournament and hearing a couple high level pros say, like, that was kind of shitty that you free rolled him here.
Right. What do you think we need? Some, I don't know exactly what the Vegas blacklist book consists of and how they go about doing that. Some consistent international book that says, "Hey, this guy cheated at GG, did this or that. He's not allowed to play live or online." Is there? I mean, the council that GG started to form with Kuhn and Fedor, that has gone by the wayside. I don't know much about it anymore. We used to
Yeah.
hear about it, and Jason walked away from there, and I don't know for that reason or not. But should there be something? And then is there? I've talked to Matt Savage about. Is there like a grace period? Like, okay, he did that, 2-year ban, he can come back. I really don't hold. I wrote stories about Justin's cheating. Many players were multi-accounting at the time. He was one that was raised up. He was one of the better players. And during that time period, Daniel stepped forward when Justin went out, 1 of 5 diamond, try to make up for his, what he'd done, and try to be a good guy in the industry as best he could. And Daniel stood up for him at that time and said, "Hey, Poker Stars, I think he should be allowed back and not banned anymore, if you recall." But people still bring it up. But a lot of players were doing it at the time. But my point is, should there be some sort of some sort of regulations, like you're banned for 2 years for doing this, or you're banned from live and online because you did this forever and ever. A black book, like whoever cheats in blackjack or Vegas, count cards, whatever it might be. You might know more about. There should be some sort of council
Yeah.
of people that holds people's feet to the fire and go, "Hey, you're not back in here at all. We don't want you around." How
Yeah.
would that be done? Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that it's necessarily great to have that sort of universal power, and I'm not so
yeah,
sure that legally it's even possible
right,
for these customers to share client information like that. But what I will say is that the Bonomo example is one of people trying to take advantage of a broken system in its early days.
yeah,
And sure, there's something nefarious there, but I think that it's difficult for us to judge people who are stress testing a new system in the early going. I think that's
hmm,
very different than people who are actively cheating today. In order to cheat today, it requires some level of sophistication and a lot of dedication to willingly and willfully stealing from your opposition. Uh,
right,
Justin's a smart kid. I'm sure that he knew that he was taking money out of his opponent's
yeah,
pockets, but it was a lot of nameless faces back then. It's very different now. The community's gotten smaller, and we just know a lot more about where the money comes from, where it goes, and what is ethical and what's not. Um, and so I do think that there should be harsher punishments now. I do think that we as a community need to kind of stand arm in arm and say, like, we're not going to tolerate these types of things. Like, look, at the advent of poker, at least its earliest days, it really was just a game about getting the best of your opposition by any means necessary. So,
hmm,
rules be damned. If you could angle somebody, if you could cheat somebody, if you could do any of these things, you just did. But we're more sophisticated than that. We've evolved past it. So you can't hold today's players to yesteryear's standards, in my opinion. And for that reason, I do think we should be harsh. I don't think we should ever be discerning between live and online. You know, like if I'm an online operator and Men the Master wants to play, no, I'm sorry, you
I
can't,
agree.
right? And like the fact that Russ Hamilton hasn't been banned from every live stop in America or the world for that matter, it's a spit in the face to everybody. Now he's not doing anything about it. He's not playing or anything along those lines. So like it kind of is a non-issue. But these are really easy things to get right, in my opinion, anyway. And where it becomes a lot more gray is like the full tilt stuff. Like, do you ban a Jesus Ferguson?
Yeah,
I don't really know. You know, it's like I don't know to the degree that he's complicit. Those are ones that I would be more willing to just let shake out in the court of law and see how the cards may fall. Like if he gets exonerated, then let him play. If he gets criminally investigated and found guilty, then of course he's banned.
right.
And it did seem like that was kind of the policy that WSOP took.
Yeah. So the most recent controversy that came up and toward the end of your show here is interesting. I'm sure you got some blips on your radar with the Maurice Hawkins.
Mm-hmm.
So and everybody has their opinion. How and you brought Denise. Denise came on. Am I correct?
Yep.
She came on to talk
Oh, she didn't come on to
and
talk. She just sent me texts.
sent you text. You
Yeah.
did share some of the texts and some of the receipts that she sent. How do you feel about that situation? And should he be allowed to play? And then also, similar to what Veronica's doing, the postal thing, trying to track down, like I think you mentioned on the show, to put a garnishment on the
Mhm.
different operators. That would be you can't put the onus on the operators to basically track stacked players and what they owe different people because it's really not their job,
Right.
right, to do that. So where does this all play out? Where do you see that this will go? Because he won't be the last one that this happens to, and you'll have some other people that get robbed in the same way, or not the right word, but just not paid back,
Yeah.
properly. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So how do we move forward and settle this and be prepared for the next thing that happens along the same
Yeah,
lines?
I mean, I think this is the nature of a cash business, and I don't think anything systematically needs to change. I think
Yeah.
this is just a name and shame type of scenario. People should be much more diligent in the way that they do business. But again, you're just always going to have quote unquote dumb money out there that does a handshake deal with somebody who isn't very trustworthy. And they're going to get what is expected to have happen. They're going to get taken advantage of. Um, we should be very quick to name and shame. We as a community should be very loud about calling out the people who are the predators in this particular space. But yeah, you're right. The operators can't do anything. There's no reason for them to do anything. It should become way more standard for people who are willing to buy action or to back people as a whole to sign
Mhm.
some sort of contracts. Uh,
I don't understand why there is no contract. It can't. I mean, that's how I've always done
with
business. It's something
ChatGPT,
written
this
down.
is really easy to get this stuff drafted up
It's
in
not. It's not rocket science to drop some sort of written agreement. You
right.
know.
Right. And then from the investor side, it's just like it's the cost of doing business to some degree. You have to be able to write off a certain percentage of what you're willing to invest as theft, petty theft or whatever. It's like any any large scale business, and granted, that's not what's happening here. This is all very small time, but any large scale business is always going to write off 1% to employee theft or whatever, and just you make a billion pencils a year. It's very likely that a couple thousand are going to go missing,
Yeah.
and that's just a cost of doing business kind of thing. But I guess in this particular instance, like the best we can do as a community, as I said, is like be loud about it, but also to educate a little bit more. Um, with the Denise thing, it particularly frustrates me because I've known her for a long time. This isn't the first time Maurice has pulled something over on her, and so it's like this isn't the first time I've had these conversations with her. It's just kind of come to a head where it's like she believes the best in people, even whenever they have no good intentions, and it's really unfortunate to see it play out publicly.
Yeah. An interesting story. I want to jump around a little bit to close things up with you. But an interesting story. Can we start sharing a bit about your? Is it AAA baseball you played? Is
No,
that
I
Wait
wish.
a minute. What you played? Where did you get? You start. You wanted to be a professional baseball
Yeah.
player. You told some stories about some famous players you'd worked with, and it was really interesting because you're an athlete and you approach poker scene with the same sort of discipline and study. But I really enjoyed you sharing that. You mentioned to me you might do more of that about your background in baseball and how it affected your growth in the game and you as a person.
Oh, you mean the Sergio Romo story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was an interesting, just happened to happen. Um, 2 years after college, I had signed up to so independent leagues. They
That's
run
okay.
yeah they run tryouts in the off season like 24/7. It's a big revenue generator for them, but it's also a
Hmm.
way to kind of acquire new talent because there's a lot of people. Baseball's so big, it's so easy to fall through the cracks, especially like if you're playing in the Northeast, like myself. You're just not really going to get any eyes on you outside of your one trip to Florida a year kind of thing. So it's a low cost. A couple $100 here and there. You go to some camps, you go to some tryouts, and I had recently been through the Midwest earlier that year. I went to a couple tryouts for the New York League, I believe,
Hmm.
and the Federal League, maybe Frontier League, Front League. Uh,
Okay.
and I made the final cuts, but wasn't exactly what they were looking for. Stayed in touch with a few of the scouts. They put me on to this Arizona Winter League in Yuma, Arizona, where I believe it was like 85 or 80 people were invited, and they were giving away like 25 contract, not giving away, but they were signing like 25
Yeah.
people out of there. Um, so I went down there with really high hopes, and very quickly realized this. I probably don't have it. Um, one of my good friends that I came in contact on there, Scott Richardson, ended up being like the number two for the Blue Jays for a couple seasons. He went to a World Series with them. He was only there because he had been floating around the North League or the Northwood League because 9/11 happened, and it happened right as he was graduating. So he wasn't drafted early out of Oklahoma State. and couldn't get a working visa. So ended up in like the Canadian independent leagues when he's clearly a major league talent.
Right.
He ultimately got signed out of this league, eventually worked his way through the Blue Jay system, found himself pitching in the World Series a few years later, 3 or 4 years later, something like that. So, wonderful story, but like he's 26 throwing 94. I'm 23 throwing like 84, thinking that somehow I'm still going to make it. But yeah, I got to
Yeah.
brush elbows with him. He was like a wonderful mentor and like really did help bridge the gap between understanding that the dream was dead and moving into poker. But Sergio at the time, I think he was like 20, 21. He was like freshly drafted in low A, maybe high A ball at that point.
Wow.
And just was very unimpressive to like look at. He's not a physical specimen by any stretch of the imagination. Didn't throw all that hard, but God, the movement on his pitches. And he would go out there and just utterly dominate. Um, and he really helped me see the game through a different lens because I grew up with such a big chip on my shoulder as a lefty who like learned to pitch later in life. It was just about throwing as hard as you could and like challenging everybody. And like I had this bulldog mentality for a guy who didn't throw all that hard. And he really taught me like the art of it, of outthinking the hitter and like pitching backwards, utilizing your off speed stuff to set up a fastball that may not be all that hard, but looks sneaky fast whenever you're changing gears from 75 to 85 kind of thing. Um, and I didn't really think too much about him after the fact. I thought a lot about Scott because I recognized how talented he was, and I wasn't shocked to see him in the show soon after. But um, a couple years down the road, sure enough, Giants are making a World Series push, and wouldn't you know it, their closer gets hurt, Brian Wilson. In comes Sergio Romo, the new closer for the San Francisco Giants. This guy who I didn't think could break a pane of glass whenever we were playing, independent ball together or whatever. And now all of a sudden, here he is throwing like low 90s with off speed stuff that just spins people into the ground. And he had a wonderful career, won 2 World Series with the Giants, and couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
So, segue that into your own. I assume you've inspired a lot of people watching me. Me too. And I've been into physical fitness and passion for nutrition all my life. But watching you do these challenges, especially the 75 hard challenge, which you did, was that a year or so ago? And then you started something up again recently. Can you talk a bit about how that segues into your mindset and into your poker? Like, how does it cross over
Yeah.
for you as far as walking into? 'Cause right now, I'm doing a series on PokerOrg, talking to players, and many of them are talking about having the stamina, what I have to do to eat to get ready for the World Series. Somebody like Chance Corn is saying, "Hey, I ran out of gas 2 years ago when I let Rigby. I should have folded there with the aces against Ace King,
Mm.
and I just wasn't mentally prepared, and I was tired." So now they talk about like an athlete being prepared for the World Series for those 6 weeks. Talk about how you've approach poker with your athletic discipline and how it served you.
I could talk way more about how it served me, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Mainly from the opposite side of Chance's perspective. Like, look, man, we all fatigue. We all hit walls. And the game is very mentally based, not as nearly as much physical. Sure, being physically fit and being able to lock in for longer, it's worth a lot of bottom line at the end of the day. But I also think that there's this aspect of people wanting to control what they can't control. And one of the biggest things that baseball specifically, I think, uh, helped me with my poker career as well as life in general is it just really taught me the value of failing and
Mm,
the ability to be objective as far as like what is and what is not in your control. You throw a perfect pitch and a guy takes you 450 feet over the fence.
yeah.
You just got to tip your cap sometimes. It's like you threw the pitch you thought you could get him out on at the exact location that you thought would spin him into the ground or tie him up or whatever, and he got the bat head around and hit him out. What more can you do? It's a game of competition, and I think a lot of people waste a lot of energy reverse engineering hands to figure out the way that they could have played it differently in order to get a different outcome. And that's just not the way the game is meant to be played. There's a winning hand and a losing hand every single or every hand that's dealt. And sometimes you're on the good side of it, sometimes you're on the bad side of it, but there are certain mechanics that you have to adhere to and certain principles that you have to follow that will result in you getting paid when you have it and you having to pay off when you don't. So, yeah, maybe chance could have got away from the ace king versus aces, but like in a vacuum, you don't. It's a hand that
Yeah.
just pays, you know? And so I guess like the discipline, the physical fitness, the being an athlete or past athlete or whatever, like I don't think any of that really helps me. Well, I'm sure it helps me day after day, but not because of the training into it aspect. Like not because I have a higher VO2 max, not
Right.
because
Right.
my stamina is 10% more than the next guy. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the physical attributes. That's not why all of that stuff helps me. All of that stuff helps me because of the intangibles that it breeds into you, the competition, the discipline, the desire to continually improve. You know, every the mantra for sports are every day you're not getting better, you're getting worse, you know.
Yeah.
So I think like the programming of being a past athlete carrying into another competitive arena is a huge leg up. uh, and obviously, eating well and being rested and all these other things are worth a lot. But I don't really buy the notion that somebody who's none of those things that starts to invest in those things
Mhm.
is really increasing uh, their bottom line in a meaningful way, more so than just running more sims would do.
Right. Interesting. What do you think about what Phil Helmuth called me a couple months ago and said, "Hey, I want to talk about this story. I'm not going to play the main event. Do you want to talk right about it?" So he announced it, and then we did a feature. What do you think about his take on the main event being sort of a endurance test and not really a poker test?
It's so contrary. Well, it's so contradictory to his whole shtick. His whole shtick is if there was no luck, I'd win them all. His whole
Right.
shtick is nobody can navigate large fields better than Phil Hellmuth. His whole shtick is I know how to survive. The entire aspect of the main event are those three things wrapped into one. Yes, it's an endurance test. Of course, it's an endurance test. So what? You know, like it actually amplifies all of the things that Phil claims he's great at. The main event has with spades. The events that he has no shot in, like high rollers, amplify all the things that he's bad at, and they require no stamina. They're a 2 day event, you know, but
Mhm.
they're small fields. They prioritize aggression over survival. They prioritize the willingness to die over the willingness to just stick around. And I don't know. Is that where Phil's pivoting to? Does he want to play more high rollers? He probably wants to play more mixed events. But like, you're playing a 3 day $1,500 horse event where first place is $65,000. That's still a testament of endurance. It's the main event is only twice as long. Yes, it's a 10-day event, but it comes with so many off days in the early going, right? So it's like
Right.
when it's all said and done, you play like what 6 or 7 days straight, and yeah, you're going to be exhausted by the time you're playing for the big money. But so what? That's a good problem to have. Cross that bridge when you get there, or proactively do some things that will allow you to have a little bit more stamina. I know that he claims a lot of sleep issues and things of that nature, but I don't know. It just feels so grandiose. Like, what are we really shaming the main event for being too good of a structure at this point?
Yeah, that's what I got from everybody. Everybody, and I assume you think he's still going to play.
Yeah, of course. And the other Phil hasn't made day three in like a decade. So it's like
Well,
this is just
well,
a proactive thing to complain about. I think I'll
Lava
be tired if I get to day five.
Yeah, Lava Karen was teasing. I got, it's the question I ask everybody I talk to these WSOP interviews for PokerOrg. Like, Lava Karen said it best. He said, well, we usually don't see Phil after day 1 or 2 anyway. So what does it really matter? But the bottom line, it's for $10 million. Just stick it out, do whatever it takes to get to the end. Brian Rast is a very fit individual. You know Brian. I've known Brian a long time, and he made it really deep. And he says he was exhausted just at
I've
the
made
end.
2 deep runs, and the irony is I was infinitely more exhausted the first time around.
Wow.
When I made day 7, I was relieved to finish 42nd.
Really?
I quadrupled my net worth, and the monkey was off my back. I didn't have to deal with the pressure was a lot, and I was young, and it was a big moment for me. And 200K or 2 million, it didn't really make a difference. It was both more money
Right.
than I had ever seen. So at the time, I was like, "Thank God it's over." I made day 5 or day 6 a couple years ago with Chance, and
Hmm.
I felt like I was just hitting my stride. But I'm in a different place now, right? Like when I was younger, I was playing round the clock 24/7. I was jumping from cash game to tournament, back into cash game, etc. 3 or 4 years ago, when I made my last deep run, it's like I played cash every single day for 50 days straight for 8 hours a day on a regimented schedule where I'm at the gym at 8 a.m. and I'm in bed by 1, and I'm getting 7 hours of sleep every single night. And then I played the main, and
Right.
things went well. So it's like, it's way more about how you're willing to compromise life work balance for a little bit of extra, I guess, volume, if you will, as opposed to increasing the quality of your play and maybe cutting some of those events.
So to wrap up some of the stuff we talked a bit about, tell me a little bit, where does Solve for Why go now? You had a beautiful channel that I assume part of forming that podcast was to promote your coaching and talk about that and your approach to the game. Where is Solve for Why at? What future do you see for the training platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. Impossible for me to know for sure. I'm
Yeah.
very interested in examining pivot. What I'm certain of is I don't think we'll do the subscription model moving forward. I never truly believed in it, and the academy itself was always our big hero product. It's what brought in the bulk of the revenue. So our hand being forced, losing the studio, as well as there just being a lot better training metrics out there. Like when we started the academy, there was no GTO Wizard or anything of the sort. PO was still very, very new, and very few people knew how to use it efficiently. So we were really feeling a need for live players to get strategy spoon fed to them in a meaningful way that kind of reframed the way that they thought logically. Less of a need for that now. Um, so I'm not entirely positive that it makes sense to seek out a new studio to build out a new academy. Um, uh, Maybe that idea isn't like totally lost yet, but
Okay.
it's in like the low probability side. The subscription model I never believed in. It was always meant to just support the academy,
Right.
and it did a great job of that. But towards the end, it became impossible to keep up with. You're constantly having to find new coaches. You're constantly in this saturated market where, at the end of the day, we're all just interpreting data for GTO Wizard anyway. Or if your preference is PO or Monk or whatever, like whatever solver it is that you're using, we're just serving as the liaison between the tool and the student. And there's a market for that, but it's well covered. Um, so I don't really want to get into that any longer. I'll probably put a lot of effort into the freemium idea, where we're releasing a lot of content for free, easy to make, very low cost. Uh, Again, always having the idea of blending entertainment with learning, as we have in the
Mhm.
past. Um, but yeah, I mean, we have a lot of hurdles to overcome. Um, Currently in litigation with one of our former partners. So how that shakes out will have a big impact on whether or not Solve for Why lives or dies in and of itself, whether or not we start something new. Same goes for the podcast. Starting something from scratch, not super appealing, but maybe maybe a blank slate and a brand new YouTube channel with 0 subscribers. See how fast we get to 100K would be a fun challenge to undertake,
Yeah.
and one that may be worth examining. For now, it's just like I haven't really had the chance to solely focus on poker in a decade. Um, and taking at least the summer to just grind and not have to think about anything business related will probably be what I do. But I really do love building things from scratch, especially in a community that I'm so heavily entrenched in, and that I believe so much in. So I think there will be some projects down the line. I just don't know what yet.
Well, I hope you were inspired by. I read a lot of the comments from some of the amazing people in the industry that really love you and really appreciate the platform. Going to miss you, and sad, and just your attitude, your sincerity, your integrity was really appreciated by the industry and the community. And I appreciate you every time taking a chance to talk to me. You answered the question. I was going to ask what's next for Matt Berkey, and I think you kind of laid it out for me and said, "Oh, this is what I'm going to do this summer. I'm just going to play poker, man." So I appreciate you, and thank you for coming on today and talking to us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, brother.
Yep.